Well, I like starting on time, so I'm going to start by introducing our presenter, Sandy Avzaradel. And yeah, there you go. And I want to just say that the format will be about 30 minutes, PowerPoint 30, 35 minutes, and then we have open discussion as the other sessions have gone. And if you want to at any time put something in the chat room to ask questions, I'll read those. And then afterwards, if you want to wave because you don't know how to use chat, then that's fine. We'll answer those questions too. So Sandy is currently the training and content specialist for Start Well. In 2018, Sandy designed, implemented, and managed the early childhood mental health and wellness program, now Start Well, a county-wide program where early childhood mental health consultants work alongside preschool professionals to support social and emotional development and effectively work with children with challenging behavior and/or mental health concerns. Sandy is the director of Early Childhood OC, an organization that promotes Orange County's early childhood policy framework, champions an increase in funding to early childhood programs and services, and supports initiatives which cultivate resilient families, ensures quality early learning, and promotes comprehensive health and development. So welcome, Sandy, and I will just let you take it away from here.
Right, thank you, and thank you for having me. I feel very honored. I'm going to share my screen here. And just let me know, I did do one presentation and I was about 30 minutes into it and somebody said, should we be seeing your screen?
Oh my gosh.
That would have been helpful early on. So if you don't see it, let me know.
We see it. You're okay.
Good. All right. Well, when Cindy contacted me, I believe, Cindy, you had seen an 𝗶cie H𝗴-𝘴 Adverse Childhood Experience presentation. Is that
say again?
The 𝗶cie Adverse Childhood Experiences?
I did, yes.
Yes. And because we're actually living currently in what we would consider a historical or collective trauma, we thought it would be interesting to talk about the effects of that on our youngest children and how we can mitigate it, how we can get people back on course and build resilience so that when a trauma occurs again in this child's life, they will have the skills and tools necessary to overcome that. So that's how this came about, and like I said, I'm honored to be here. The first thing I wanted to talk about is really what is infant early childhood mental health, because when we think of mental health, probably the first thing that comes into your mind is anxiety or depression or psychosis or some clinical mental health issue that comes into your mind. And we tend to place adult mental health issues and we just kind of shove it down to the little ones. And it's really not like that in early childhood. And just to define early childhood, it's birth to age 8. And the reason it is birth to age 8 is because by the time a child is 8, approximately 95% of brain development has already occurred. We go down to age 5, approximately 90% of brain development has occurred. So most of brain development has occurred by that. We have that last 5%, which is typically the frontal lobe, which we don't fully develop until between 25 and 35 years of age. So we have this very, very rapid time of neural connections happening. And so what we want to do is look at early childhood mental health in terms of developing social and emotional skills. So you can see here, really what mental health is the capacity of a child to be able to develop social skills, to experience emotions, and to build positive and responsive relationships. And what we know is that if the child has a capacity to do this, especially by the time they're age 8, they have a very strong resilience and are able to get through some adversity much easier than if they don't have those strong skills. So how do we support it? How do we support this, what we consider mental health and wellness in young children? Well, we support it through positive and responsive relationships with adults. And if you take anything away tonight, it's the power of these relationships, the interconnectedness between two people that really is the magic ingredient into everybody's mental health and wellness. If children have at least one person in their life that they can rely on, that they're consistent, they're stable, they respond to them, then they can mitigate a lot of the effects of trauma. So positive and responsive relationships with adults. And so of course that starts at birth, typically with parents, and then it goes on to secondary caregivers. It might be extended family, it might be early care and education providers, and then later, as they get into school age, it becomes their teachers in their school, coaches, ministers. Any adult can be this for that child. The more, the better that are positive and responsive. So that is the key ingredient to this, setting this positive trajectory for the rest of their life. We can also support it by prioritizing social skill development and emotional literacy at home and in early learning environments. In our society, especially in Southern California, we place a very large emphasis on pre-academic and academic skills, starting, and you see it starting in preschool. And what we know is that social skills and emotional development are the foundation. If you think of a pyramid, those are the foundation to all other learning, because we are social creatures. We learn when we're in a social context. And so if we want to make sure that we're setting kids up on a positive trajectory, we want to focus on helping them develop those strong social skills, play skills, friendship skills, turn taking, problem solving. We also want to help them label, identify emotions. First, it starts with themselves, then they can start seeing it in others. And you notice here I have social skills. You'll always see me have social skills and emotional skills separate, because they are really two very different things. And I was actually just saying to Cindy at the beginning, if you can name it, you can tame it. And that's part of emotional literacy, is being able to identify and label your emotions, so then you can get a hold of them and you can learn how to manage them appropriately. So positive, responsive adults, prioritizing social skill development and emotional literacy at home and in those early environments, and then through unstructured and structured play. Play is, I guess it's the second magic ingredient besides a positive and responsive relationship, but play allows us to develop these social skills and the emotional literacy, which includes the problem solving and managing relationships. We do that through play. And so providing young children, especially again in those first 8 years of life, the opportunity to have unstructured play for an extended period of time, where they can actually get into different play schemas and develop that. And then also structured play for games and things that have a little bit more structure to them. They're learning a lot, turn taking and not winning all the time, that winning and losing and all of those things just build our confidence, they build our resilience, and that's what's going to help us through these hard times that we're going to experience through life. And then obviously the environment plays a huge role. We want to make sure it's safe and it's predictable and it's nurturing. If we have these 4 things, we will be developing very strong and resilient children that will turn into strong and resilient adults. So that's just an introduction to early childhood mental health. So I want to talk about the different types of trauma that we can experience, and the reason trauma is so harmful, both to our physical bodies as well as our mental health, is because of toxic stress. And toxic stress is prolonged stress over a period of time without getting resolved. So if you think about stress, we have positive stressors in our life, you know, new job, new baby, new house. We have other stressors that might be hard to get through, but we have the support of our village to help get through that stressful time. It might be a death in the family, or, you know, a car accident or something where it's a trauma, but we have the support of others around us to help us through that. Toxic stress happens over a prolonged period of time, and it typically is without the support of others. And so that creates these neurochemicals in our body, the stress chemicals in our body that actually do harm to our organs and our mental health. So we're currently living in what we would consider a historical collective trauma. And by definition, it means it spans multiple generations. And it is experienced by a group, not by an individual. And it has this multi-generational impact. And when I say spans multi-generations, it has to do with this impact that we have somebody on.
And so now the water is full in play.
Oh, there we go. We have the impact that we're seeing right now, right? We're seeing this toxic stress happening right now because, I mean, it's been a year plus, but we will see the effects of this for generations to come. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that happens through epigenetics in a moment, but we are currently living this. So we have to keep in mind as we are interacting with each other that we're all dealing with this. Another type of trauma is what we would call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And there are 10 of them. And though they were identified 10 different types of trauma through a study that was done by the CDC and Kaiser, and it was actually done in Southern California in 1997-ish. And they categorized 3 different areas. You can see them there: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And there were different types of trauma under each of those 3 categories. And what they found is that if a person experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences in their life, they had a very strong, there was a very strong correlation to 9 out of the 10 leading causes of death. And so what we want to do is try and mitigate the effects of that toxic stress so it doesn't disrupt neurodevelopment, it doesn't disrupt learning, it doesn't disrupt those all of those neural connections that are happening, and which lead to then physical issues, as well as health risk behaviors. Smoking, drug use, alcoholism, which then all of those can lead to societal issues, which can lead then to an early death. So that study is specific to those 10 different traumas, but we also know there are other traumas out there, right? So I like to talk about them as adverse community experiences. So things that are happening in the community that people are witnessing or living in that also are creating this trauma, this prolonged period of time where there's lots of toxic stress running through our bodies. And you can see here poverty, violence, racism, homelessness, forced displacement. And we've experienced those as a society in the last year as well. We continue to experience them, but we have seen incidents that have come up that are definitely adverse community experiences. So those three, and then another type of trauma is this disrupted attachment or bonding when a child is born, and that also affects these chemicals in our body that create this toxic stress if there's disrupted attachment or a negative type of attachment. There's different types of attachment out there. And we want to make sure that we can mitigate that so that we can stop that toxic stress running through that baby's body so that they don't have those disrupted neural connections happening. Didn't know it was going to be a science lesson, right? So moving more into the science about it and how why this affects us physically and mentally. It's through epigenetics, and epigenetics is how your behavior and your environment express the way or affect the way you express your genes are expressed. So basically, trauma can impact the turning on or off of your genes. Or the brightening or dimming of genes. So when we look at historical trauma, something that may have happened many, many generations ago can have an impact on future generations. Okay, and what happens is, and not to get too scientific, but I had to do a little bit, the protein in our genes, the histone, there's a tail, and this tail provides the genetic information to determine what genes are turned on and off. And these chemicals in our body, these stress hormones like cortisol, can affect the tail that is giving that genetic information to the cells, and so to the genes. And so let me give you an example, and there are several, but I'll use the Holocaust as one example. So people that were affected by the Holocaust, obviously traumatic experience, lasted many, many years, and had lasting impacts on multiple generations. Well, so if you fast forward to a child today, let's say, or a young adult today, who is Jewish, who may have had ancestors that had firsthand experience of the Holocaust, you may see some genetic differences in certain genes that are turned on or off because of the generations of trauma that happened way before they were even born, that are passed down from one person to another. So from the mother, father, down to the baby. And what happens is that tail is different. That tail is what is telling those genes to turn on or to turn off. So you might have a child that is afraid of being removed from the family, but had no initial experience of that. It may be because his or her ancestors had experienced a removal from the family, and then ultimately death, and that is being passed down and down and down. Another example of that is the slave trade that was happening. And so through generations and generations and generations, it's there's this genetic code from this tail, this histone tail, that's being passed down that actually is providing that information to those genes. So there's a lot that can happen, and what we want to do is figure out, how do we mitigate this? How do we can't necessarily change what's going to happen, but we can change how we respond to it and how to build resilience in our young children and our adults that will have a lifetime positive effect on whatever trauma they experience. Another part of the epigenetics is, again, that attachment disorder. So children with strong attachments have more of this corticotizone in their hippocampus in the brain, which turns off the stress response after a stressful experience is over, because they have that attachment. They know they're in a safe, predictable environment. And so they are turning off that stress, that cortisol stress hormone, because they know that it's over and they're going to be fine. If they are not, if they have a attachment disorder, that doesn't happen, and that cortisol just keeps running through their body. So our experiences and our environment will determine how our genetics are expressed, and sometimes that means looking generations before us to see why we are the way we are in some way. So I'm going to talk about 3 ways, basically the continuum of care: promotion, prevention, and intervention. So what can we do to promote resilience? And the first thing is supporting the adults who support young children. So parents, secondary caregivers, we want to make sure that we are building these positive and responsive interactions. Having knowledge of child development, knowing what to expect at each developmental age, helps us respond appropriately to children. So, we don't have expectations that are too high for that child, and that doesn't increase their frustration, which increases our frustration, and so on and so forth. So having knowledge of child development, what should I be expecting at this stage or at this stage? Having knowledge of social skill development, how do I proactively teach social skills or help my child learn social skills? How can I help them practice them? Having that knowledge will help build that resilience in your child. And then again, the emotional literacy. And that starts with adults being able to label their emotions, being able to manage their own emotions, being able to say, I'm angry right now because, as opposed to just losing it, right? Being able to identify, label, and respond appropriately to our emotions. We're all going to be angry. We're all going to be sad. We're all going to be happy. We're all going to be excited. How do we do that in a pro-social way? And it starts by that modeling of the adults to the child. And then adult self-care. And I know that this is kind of the buzzword right now. Everybody needs to do self-care, but what we're finding, and there's a lot of research supporting this, is that it's not a luxury. Self-care is not a luxury. It's actually essential to our mental health and wellness and those that we are around. Because if we are not the best that we can be, then we're not going to be good for those that we're around. And so looking at self-care, physical self-care, mental self-care, spiritual self-care, as looking at those things as essential, just as water and food and nutrition. If you look at it in that way, we're going to be the best we can be. We're going to show up the best way we can for those that we're around. So switching that from, oh, that's a luxury, to no, this is really essential, just like everything else that's essential in my life. I need to do this. And And then knowing where, when, and how to get supportive services when there are times of need. It's not always times of need, but when there is, oftentimes we're so worked up that we don't even know where to go for help. So identifying supportive services before you're in a crisis will help support, because it helps support your family, help support your own mental health and wellness, and those essential things that you need in life. So identifying where you can turn to if you need help during a crisis time. So those are some things that we can do to promote mental health and wellness in our children. And then the prevention. How can we prevent the impacts of trauma? Now, it's really difficult to prevent trauma, right? But how can we prevent the long-lasting impacts of trauma? Again, you've seen this before. At least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult. And again, I can't say that enough. We need that as adults, but we need to make sure that our children have that. Hopefully it's their own parents, maybe it's extended family, maybe it's a secondary caregiver, but at least one person, the more the better. And then again, those strong social skills and emotional literacy. Prevention, helping a child have a sense of self-efficacy, that they can do it, that I am in control of my life and I can do this. That's really hard for young children and parents to work through, because there's always that push and pull of control, right? And how do we give our children a sense of control by still maintaining safety and security and all of that, but giving them a sense of control in their life, that yes, I can do this. I can solve this problem. I can be independent. I can, put my clothes on myself. If we never give children the chance to do things on their own, to be independent, to make decisions on their own and fall when that decision has a consequence that they may not like, we are taking away that sense of self-efficacy, thinking, yeah, I can do this, I got this. Adaptive skills and independence, that all goes into that building of that self-confidence. And then healthy activities. My niece is a dietitian and a Pilates instructor, and she has ingrained in my head that we don't call it exercise, we call it joyful movement. Because it shouldn't be a have to, it should be a want to, right? And joyful movement is different for everybody, and everybody needs something different. So teaching our kids about movement, the importance of movement, and that it should be fun, something that we like to do, not exercise. Also teaching our children about stress reduction practices. For kids, belly breathing is a great way to look at that. There's lots of yoga for kids, but helping them with breathing to reduce their stress, whatever it is, having a calming place, teaching them those strategies to just slow everything down and calm down when they're feeling anxious or upset. And then play. Using play to build that executive function, self-regulation, problem solving, and friendship skills. So that's how we're building resilience in kids, is promotion and prevention. Now, there are times when young children do exhibit some mental health concerns. And so these are some signs and symptoms of young children. The first thing you're going to see more than likely is ongoing, persistent, challenging behaviors across settings. And you see I bolded and italicized that because every child who has challenging behaviors. And that is not a concern, a mental health concern. Mental health concern is when it is across time and across settings that we're seeing this challenging behavior, and things we're trying to do to mitigate that are not working. So that's typically the first sign that you will see.
It's excellent.
Questions?
Could you put us back on gallery
Yes.
view? Yeah, so then you can see people.
There.
And if
Hello,
anyone
everyone.
has any questions, you can put it in the chat and or wave. I'll try to see who's waving. Okay, I do have a question.
Okay.
So I guess I would like to have a little bit more formal definition of, and maybe this is like a dumb question, but attachment, non-attachment, what does that look like, or how do you define that?
Yeah.
I don't know what
So-
you mean.
Okay, so attachment when a baby is born, the attachment to their caregiver. There are different types of attachment, and what we want to see is this strong, and I don't want to get into the whole, science behind it, but what we want to see is a parent and child attachment, so that that child feels that their needs and wants are going to be met consistently. When that's disrupted, then the child, that stress, cortisol starts to go through the body, because they don't know if that parent is going to give them, or that caregiver is going to give them what they need at the time that they need it. And so that starts, at birth with, the crying, and what we typically do as moms and dads, naturally, soothe them and talk to them and all of those things. But if a mom is dealing with perinatal mood disorder, or some, depression, anxiety right after birth, that can disrupt that attachment and bonding that occurs right then. And that attachment lasts, it's a good first year. And once a child realizes, yes, they're going to be back, they're going to attend to my needs, I'm going to get what I need out of my caregiver, then that just relaxes their whole system down, and they're able to build these relationships.
So an abnormal one means that they don't trust that they'll be soothed and calm. And does that go like past infancy? It goes all through to 8-year-old, or okay?
Oh, it goes all the way through. We could probably, as adults, sit here and think about our attachment. There's typically there are 4 different styles of attachment, and you can look those up on the internet easy. But we could all look and see, was I securely attached? That's what we want, secure attachment with my caregivers, or was I not? There are a couple other that are not as healthy, and that has lifetime implications if we don't have that early on.
What would be some of the signs of something going sideways?
Distrust.
Alcoholism, like drugs.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then we would oftentimes, if we have a difficult time trusting, then that could go back to attachment. I mean, there's a lot of psychological things that go into it, but when we look at figuring out a child and the attachment there, we'll have the caregiver leave and then come back and see how the child responds. And a securely attached child will probably show some distress when the caregiver leaves, but then they recover pretty easily, because again, they know, okay, they're going to come back, because they always come back. When the caregiver comes back, they're excited to see them, and then they move on. Where if you'll have some kids where they don't care if the parent leaves, and they don't care when the parent returns. Or they never, so they dysregulate when the parent leaves, and they can never regulate again, until that parent comes back.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, and you'll see, patterns of behavior based on attachment all the way through life.
Awesome. Okay, well, we have quite a few questions for you now.
Oh, good. Okay.
I'll read them off. One is, so with the passing down of genetic trauma, have you seen any flaring of this recently with the recent acts of violence towards certain populations like Asians, African Americans, the LGBTQ community? Are you saying that potentially the current hate towards, say, an Asian American child in a school could be amplified because of their former experience, or maybe a genetic parent, type thing?
It absolutely could be, where we see the strong effects of it coming down generation to generation, and is when it is a multi-generational trauma that's happened, like the slave trade, like the Holocaust, like these things that happen for many, many years, and we see things like that. Acts of violence, a child experiencing an act of violence, yes, they could be more prone to reacting to it if in their ancestors, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, they had witnessed acts of violence, then they may have a very different response to it than somebody who had not had any of that in their, generations prior to. So that's a great example of that turning on or off. How am I going to respond to this?
Right.
Is based on, some genetics.
Another question. Do you think masks will affect infant attachment?
Oh, such a good question. I hope that mamas and daddies are not wearing masks at home. I do think there's going to be some effects because it's been a year, right? It's been over a year that, if you're 1 to 6 months, actually from birth on, you're constantly looking at people's face and facial expressions. That's how we communicate. And so I do think there's going to be some impact. And I think very much we as a community have to really be aware of that and do some things to help mitigate it when we're not wearing masks. Don't wear them when you don't need to, make sure that you're really focusing on facial expressions and things like that when you're not masked. Yeah, I kind of liken masks to, and this might shock some of you, but to young parents or new parents, not necessarily young parents, but new parents, always with a cell phone in their hand, because they're looking at the cell phone a lot, right? When they're feeding, nursing, whatever, they're looking at the cell phone or taking pictures or taking video. They always have this device in their hand that an infant doesn't know what that is. They just know that my mom or my dad are very interested in that thing. That thing is very important to them. So it's a similar effect as kids, babies, young children crave that looking at the facial expressions. And it's your face is very complex. So you're just building all those neural connections. And when you only see this, it's really hard to develop that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so let's see. During COVID, social interactions have been so limited for kids. The lack of interaction is tough as we emerge into the world with vaccines. What can we do to help support kids through that transition?
Give grace. We're going to see a lot of behavior, right? And you've probably seen adult behavior that hasn't been particularly wonderful. But have some grace, have lots of patience. And I know people are worried about learning loss, but we won't learn if we aren't mentally well, right? So everybody is experiencing fear and anxiety, and we've got to deal with that before we can take on those academic concerns that people have. The good news is the entire world is in the same boat, right? It's almost like we've all lost a year of that kind of education we were used to. But I think as a community, we have to really start focusing on those social and emotional skills in our mental health before we have expectations of testing or getting through this, Algebra 2 or whatever, really focusing on that re-entry into a social situation as opposed to the academic piece of it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so what specific behaviors are you seeing in children that are related to the effects of the pandemic? And are there specific suggestions for parents, given that parents are feeling a loss of control as well? I was going to ask you the same thing. Are you seeing like a trend going on, and what can we do?
Take care of yourself as the adult in that child's life. Manage your stress and anxiety and fear, because there's a thing called mirror neurons, where we are actually mirroring what's happening with the person that's very important to us in our life. Typically, that's our parents. And when we feel stress and anxiety and fear, our children are feeling it. And so I think the best we can do is work on our own mental health and wellness and be the strongest we can be for our child. And use this as a learning opportunity and an opportunity to build resilience. It's like, yeah, this is hard, you know. Mommy's trying to, you know, work full time and cook and homeschool and you know, be a doctor because I can't go to my, you know, I mean, there's a lot. So how do we not necessarily normalize it, but say it is what it is. And we're just going to take one day at a time and do what we can. And lower our expectations of what we expect from people, right? Have grace.
Excellent answer. I always tell people to try to model healthy behavior, and you know, those around you will, you know, catch the spirit. Okay, so here's another one. How do you help young children up to age 8 who have missed out on being with peers to increase brain capacity after 5, 90%, or age 8, 95%? How do you, you know, recommend, what do you recommend?
So say that one more time.
How do you help young children up to age 8 who have missed out on being with peers to increase brain capacity after age 5 or age 8?
Oh, all of those things that we talked about before, you know, the play and giving them access to problem solving. I like to tell parents to honor this, and teachers, honor the struggle. Let them struggle a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Don't jump in. Let them solve those problems. You know, again, silver lining in this pandemic is I'm seeing lots of family time. I'm seeing, I walk at the park and I see whole families playing together. That's great. Kids will adapt. They're very flexible. Once they get back into school and back into their normal routines with social, this isn't going to set them back. They're going to be fine. We just have to be aware that this is a trauma and we need to do all those good things, you know, the play and the building of those social skills and identifying our emotions and not hiding them, not pretending they're not there, putting them out there, holding space for strong emotions from our kids, right? Not trying to fix it, but just let them be and say, you know, I hear you, I see you, I feel you, and we're going to get through this.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And one thing I see with kids or even adults right now is a tendency to give up too fast on any certain task, or, you know, how do I explain that? It's almost like, no, I'm going to make you stay at this.
Yeah.
And you're giving up too soon. And to, not to say build resilience, but hey, you gotta, you know, put your big girl panties on and do it, you know, so to speak. So,
and
but
it's
there's
hard.
a lot of that right now because there's just a sense of, you know, giving up with this pandemic a lot sooner, it seems to me. So
yeah, and as parents and teachers, we don't want to see our kids struggle, right? We want to try and protect them from all.
Yeah.
And we're actually doing a disservice, and we're seeing that now because we are seeing kids that are not resilient, that are falling apart, and part of it is because we haven't let them fall. We don't let them fall and then help pick them back up.
right.
It's not the trauma that's the issue. It's how we respond to the trauma that really is the key. You know, do they have somebody that's supportive that can help pick them up and move them forward? Or do we just say, oh, too bad, and you know, you're on your own?
Sandy, do you have a cell phone or another device near your computer? Because we've got a buzz going on with you when you're talking. Do you have a cell phone around, or?
I do have a cell phone,
Can you push it away from your computer?
Pretty. Is that better?
No, it's actually, you can tell removing it.
How about that? Is that
Try
better?
it again. Yes, much better. Okay.
Let's check headphones off.
So another question, in general, do children who are homeschooled lack social skills with peers? Do you see more of a difference when they're homeschooled?
It kind of depends on other activities that the child is maybe engaged in. So if they're in sports or dance or drama or music outside of that home, it's everybody's different, right? We all have different temperaments. I think another silver lining of this is the fact that some kids are thriving on online school.
Yeah.
Some kids are thriving. Others are not, and so now maybe school districts will have options so that we can meet the needs of all the kids. So homeschooling is, there's no one good way to have it. It depends on your child. It depends on your family. It depends on your environment. Same with, childcare versus staying home, putting a child in childcare versus, a stay-at-home family. It's really dependent on your family unit and what works for you.
I know I laugh, pastoral care-wise, the introverts kind of are fine.
Yeah.
It's the extroverts that are acting out and wanting to, be at church or what, like, oh my gosh, you could just see the difference in, hey, I'm fine at home, no problem. And then the extroverts are like bouncing off the wall. It's pretty funny. Another fun question. You talk a lot about insertion of play, quotes, in childhood development. Is the insertion of play supposed to continue into adults too?
Yes. What do we call play in adulthood? Anyone? Hobby.
I was gonna say sports, golf, yeah, hobbies, yeah.
Hobbies, right? And we tend to as adults look at hobbies as, a check off, like, I like to do this, but I'm going to kind of check it off, not as play. So yeah, we need to be playing as adults because that helps our brain continue to make those neural connections. Because your brain stops. We prune those neural connections prune away when they're not utilized or when they're damaged. And so as we age, it's harder to get those neural connections. It takes more time and more effort, but it still happens. And so we want to continue to do those things to build those neural connections as we age. My mom started taking piano when she was 60. She's 78, 9 now, and hard, but she is doing it to help continue to build those neural connections, which is great, great for the brain.
Any other questions? Wave if you want. I can call on you. I'm trying to go through here. Anyone? Sandy, you've been wonderful. I appreciate it so much that you took the time tonight to be with us at St. James. And please know that we're here if you need anything also. We're just around the corner from you, I think. So
yeah, thank you.
So,
I feel very honored to have been here, and I will actually put in the chat my email, and
thank you.
for parents or grandparents or anybody, if you have any questions on anything, I'm more than happy to talk with you.
Well, I just want you to know too, the talk that you gave, you were the one that stood out. I was telling you, she's the one that we have to come talk at St. James. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Really appreciate it. So Sandy at earlychildhoodoc.org, people. So thank you for joining us, everyone. And this concludes our Collective Trauma Summit. So I really appreciate everyone attending and hope to see you soon.
Right.
Thank you, Sandy.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
evening.